In this lesson, we'll be using an FFD to make the heart look like it's sliding, just like we did the guts in the last lesson. Okay, so I want to show you what I finished up in between lessons for those guts. So you can kind of see how they're moving around from above. You can really kind of start to see how there's some follow through and they kind of bounce back, and you can do that all just by animating those points of the freeform deformer. Now, one of the things that I did just now to be able to just watch it was to turn that deformer off in the filter. So you can go in, turn it off, and that makes it a little bit easier to see if you want to play it back really quickly. So I'm going to turn it back on because we're about to add another one to our heart. Now, one other thing that I changed was, remember how it was kind of flattening out strangely in some places? Sometimes you'll get weird things like that happening if your freeform deformer is not tall enough or wide enough or long enough. If a part of those guts or whatever geometry you are using that's inside of it is sticking out of it or even really close to it, then you can start to get some weird effects. So I'm going to turn off auto key because I don't want to set a key for this, but I want you to see that if, let's say I go into this Y property here, if I start to squish this, let's move forward to a point where it's kind of moved more. You can see how we get this weird shifting. So that is definitely not what I want. So I'm going to undo that. So that'll stay around 70. And as long as I don't set a keyframe and leave it tall enough, 70 is a really good height for me to not accidentally squish those and cause any kind of weird shifting in that geometry that's unnecessary and undesirable. Okay, so let's add another freeform deformer so we can start doing the same thing to our heart and just kind of learning from some of the issues that we may have run into in the last lesson. So we'll go ahead and let's drop in another freeform deformer. And we want to find our heart, which is right there at the bottom. So we'll go ahead and grab this and drop it down underneath the heart geometry. And if we zoom out a little bit, you see it's again defaulting to that 0 point. So we'll go ahead and let's go back up to our model mode, grab our move tool, and we'll place this right here. You can go middle click and go into your top view. And we'll just kind of rotate that around, move this over just to get it into place. And then while we're looking at this top view, we'll go into our object tab. And let's not worry about the y-axis yet because we can't really tell the height of it, but we can change that width and length, whichever way you're looking at it. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's middle click again and then middle click back in our perspective view. You can see it's a little too tall, but we don't want to cause the same problem we had with our other piece, so I'll make sure I give it plenty of room on the top and bottom and sides. Okay, that looks great. Now if you want to, we can add another set of divisions, but I think in this case you really wouldn't have to, but it might be nice to have one more set of divisions going this way. So if we're in our object, we can add some more points in the Z or the Y. So you see we have some more points just here on the back that we can work with. I really don't think you need any more in the X though. Okay, so now that we've got those points set up, you want to make sure you grab your freeform deformer, you go into your coordinates and you freeze your transformations here on this first frame. And then we'll come over here and go into our point mode and make sure you still have your point level animation turned on. I'll go ahead and let's set a keyframe on this first frame and also turn on auto key. Okay, now I turned off auto key earlier just because I wanted to show you that movement for the object height on our other freeform deformer. That's why I turned it off, and so now we're turning it back on for our animation. I just turned it off because I didn't want to key that height property. I only wanted the keys that we'd already set from the last lesson. Okay, so just so that's clear. Now let's go ahead and get started animating. So again, we can kind of rotate into a top view just like this, and we can really kind of watch this one too to kind of see how this should move. So we kind of get this little movement here where it goes, this would actually drag out because it's going to the right. So we can grab these pieces, grab your rectangle selection. And let's say for this one, we just want to grab the bottom pieces and have the bottom move more than the middle or the top. Like that. And maybe even move the top over to the right a little bit. Okay? So you can kind of see how those two keyframes, when we're looking at it in a top view, that makes a lot of sense for how this is moving. So the bottom of it would get dragged more than the top would, obviously, because the top's not touching the ground. Okay, so we'll scrub to that keyframe and then keep scrubbing forward a little bit more till about, let's see, this one drags and drags until about right there, then it starts to come back. So which way would this one drag? Probably would drag backwards a little bit and a little bit to the right. And then we could probably come in here and move some of these points back this way a little bit. So you can see it'll drag and stretch. And then we come to about right here and it goes sort of just back into place. So then we can just push this back up here. So it drags and then releases and kind of jumps back like an inchworm. So let's scrub forward a little bit more. And it looks like this piece kind of goes up and to the side. But this one we don't really have a lot of room to go to the side, so we'll just do a slightly less obvious movement for this one. There, just like that. And I guess at this point we could, let's see, we could pull this one back just a touch, just like that. Just very, very slight amount of movement backwards. And then we start coming back over here. So about right here, it just kind of goes back into place almost. So we'll just select that piece and move that. And right about here, I'm going to rotate this around so it's a little bit easier to see. Right about here, it starts kind of dragging backwards a little bit again because of that rotation movement. So we can do that as well. Maybe scoot this side part out just a little bit to kind of mimic that. There we go. And then it's just going to kind of drag back in right about here. So we can pull this back over. And honestly, having fewer keyframes on these actually makes it look more realistic. So we'll have more keyframes on the null that controls the zombie and then fewer here on this FFD. And then I'm just going to scrub forward a little bit further. And it looks like right about here we really start to swing over to the side. So let's do right about here. We've got maybe a little bit more backwards movement. And then here, from here to here, we'll go over to the left. And maybe have these middle ones go over to the left and backwards a little bit as well. And then they start to swing back the other way. So we can just kind of even those back out. Maybe even pull those on the side in a little bit more. And then towards the end of it, let's just kind of suck everything back up to its rightful place because there's not a lot of movement happening. So it has time for its elastic properties to kick back in. Let's go ahead and zoom back out a little bit and then let's just hit play and see what it looks like. They look like they're matching together pretty well, but it's a little bit hard to tell with those deformers. So let's go ahead and go into our filter and uncheck the deformer so we can hit play and really see what that movement looks like. I think that's looking great. Really matching up with the movements and feeling like it's actually dragging in space. Perfect. Okay, so in the next lesson, there's one other type of movement that I want to add here, because once we get back into having this overlaying on our zombie, it's going to look really static. And one of the issues with the way that this footage was shot, if we turn this back on for a moment and go into our camera view, let's turn off the zombie guts for a second and just watch this background plate. His legs have quite a lot of movement in them. I mean, even trying to just pull himself with his arms, we've still got a lot of that movement. And so what's happening because of that is we get a lot of movement back here with those hips. And so because of that, it's going to look like there's a lot of hip movement and that his spine can still move. And so there's a lot of leeway you have whenever something has been torn apart, like what we're trying to create, but you still are going to have a little bit of an issue with possibly too much movement in the hips looking unrealistic with no legs being present. So a way that we can get around that is by adding a bend deformer that deforms this little portion of the tailbone. And we can kind of flex that almost like it is a tail of an animal. So it moves kind of inverse to what his back is doing and the movement of the whole carcass, and that is going to make a huge difference in the way that this feels like it's being controlled. Just with that little bit of tail movement, it's really going to make it feel more animated and a little bit less fake. So without having a complete rig of the spine, we're just kind of doing this with a few deformers and a few nulls, not really getting into a lot of complex rigging. We can still make this look really great. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to use a bend deformer to really start animating this part of the tailbone in a lot more realistic way.